Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Wow, not too bad, not too bad. So, we're doing the... Is it time yet? It's time already, right? Yeah, okay. All right, we're 4 minutes late. Okay. All right. So we're doing the second workshop for the Noble Eightfold Path series. And today, as usual, we have Ajahn Brahmali and Venerable Mudito. So we don't need any introduction. Let me just quickly introduce who the nuns we have here today. So we've got Venerable Munisara. We've got Venerable Upeka. It's like wondering why there's no Venerable Upeka on the seat. Okay, and Venerable Upeka, no, okay, all right. And then we've got Venerable Gotami, Venerable Karunika, and Venerable Karunika is going to do the guided meditation today. Last time she did the death contemplation one, isn't it? That's really good. Venerable Jenti, as well as Venerable Sorata. So just a few things that I'd like to mention this morning. We are constantly trying to improve the program and how we run it. So each time after each workshop, I'll be like emailing Ajahn Brahmali, oh, should we do this, should we do that? Anyway, so we noticed that we've taken quite a lot of time answering questions and for people to ask questions. But we want to make sure that the teachers still have enough time to address those questions. They are important questions. But at the same time, also have enough time to finish the materials that the teachers have prepared. So we were thinking that from today's workshop onwards, because the teachers will open up the questions and answer after each mini meditation. So we will take questions from two people, or rather 2 questions. We'll have 2 questions per mini meditation. Yeah? Yeah. And because we're only taking 2 questions per mini meditation, we would like to ask everyone to try and give chance to someone else who has not asked the question for this session. At the same time, in order to make sure that any burning questions are not left unanswered, I have prepared a question box, a little bit similar to how we run retreats, and we have, because it's a silent retreat and we can't talk, and then we have people to kind of like write the questions on a piece of paper. And then we can pass the questions to the teachers, and they can then see, depending on time, whether they want to address the questions during this workshop or during next workshop. But I'm quite sure they will address it sometime during the series, yeah? And of course, these 2 questions limit does not appeal to the nuns. So the nuns can ask questions, more than 2 questions. And the teachers are quite happy to answer it. Yeah.
Lei Hai.
Sorry, and the monk too.
Lei Hai.
And I forgot to introduce. There's Venerable Metaji sitting there. Yeah.
Lei Hai. One of the things that we can do is that because sometimes there will be extra time at the very end, and we can actually do more questions then if there are lots of questions left. So if you have a box full of questions or whatever, we can do it at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then we are also asking people to ask questions that are related to Noble Eightfold Path. There are always other avenues for you to ask other related questions. But yeah, so let's just keep those questions to this. And I just want to quickly mention, as those of you would have known, we are doing a small donation drive to get a new laptop for Ajahn Brahmali for the monastery. So I've got a donation box outside, but now because the class has started, we brought it in. So we'll put the donation box outside again during lunchtime. And then if some of you didn't bring cash, just approach me, and then we'll see what we can do. Yeah. Other than that, I think that's pretty much it. Did I miss anything else, Ajahn?
That sounds good to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So with that, let me hand back to the teachers.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Lei Hai. And so we are going to continue pretty much where we left off last time. So remember, this is about early Buddhism. And because it is about early Buddhism, it really is about what the Buddha taught and not about Buddhist traditions and Buddhist developments over the past 2,500 years. It's about coming back to kind of the what the Buddha taught. And of course that is very important because what the Buddha taught obviously is the gold standard for what Buddhism is about. And everything else in the 2,500 years since then, it might be right, sometimes it might be wrong, but what the Buddha taught obviously has to be the standard for everything else. And because of that, usually when we have these workshops, we have a session where we talk about misconceptions. Last time we had misconceptions about dependent origination. Now we're going to look at the misconceptions about the Noble Eightfold Path. Some of the wrong ideas that are out there, or you can see, if not wrong, at the very least, they are not really in accordance with how the Buddha taught, and that is kind of the essential thing here. So we're going to look at that and see what happens when we look at these ideas. And maybe today, maybe we will have when we have the breakout session later on, maybe we can discuss this topic further. Some of you may have some ideas of your own about what are misconceptions about early Buddhism. About the Noble Eightfold Path. Better get this right. And it's nice to get added because we have obviously a limited idea about what these misconceptions are. It's good to have other people's input as well. That might be an interesting topic for later on. You can bring up your favorite misconception, or you can maybe bring up your own misconception. Yeah, now I get it. Now I understand. Thank you so much for clarifying my my own kind of. This often happens. So the first misconception we're going to look at is the following here. Yeah, all paths are different ways up the same mountain here. The mountain symbolizes kind of climbing the mountain. It's like walking the path, yeah, and reaching the pinnacle is like reaching the end point of that particular spiritual path, or whatever it is. And this is a very common view that you will hear, especially maybe so much in Buddhism, but sometimes you hear it in certain religions that have this idea. Sometimes Buddhists also have this idea. There are certain kind of more new religions, which tend to have these sort of ideas. So is it really true? That is really the issue here. And so this is kind of the idea, many paths with the same destination here. You climb the same mountain. Which mountain is that? Can you recognize that mountain? I think K2, something like that? I'm not sure what it is. It looks like some really awesome mountain. But anyway, so if you get to the peak of K2, you find God. That's what this says. And so here you have all of these various religions, everyone going to the same place. Is that really the case? Why is Buddhism missing, by the way? You have Islam, Christianity, Hinduism. Buddhism is not there. That's usually the case. That's really bad, I think. Anyway, so okay. So this is one alternative. Then there's the other alternative, which is like this. Is it clear? Yeah. So this. I think this has been made by Christians. This particular one. You can see Christianity leads to eternal life. The other ones just lead to death. Yeah, that's it. You die and you're finished. And I think this must be a kind of slightly biased kind of scheme over here. So this is the alternative. Yeah. So which one is more likely to be true? Well, this one obviously is also wrong in the sense that, but what is more likely to be true? And I think a lot of this idea that all paths leads to the same destination, it is kind of emotionally satisfying. Yeah, sentimentally it feels nice. Yeah, it's a nice sentiment. We're all traveling together. We're all brothers and sisters in the, on the spiritual paths, and we're all heading in the same direction. But I think the reality is much more complicated because obviously, I think the first question is, well, which paths are we talking about here? Obviously, there's an endless potential number of paths. If someone is kind of praying to Thor and Odin, are they traveling on the same mountain as well?
They're going to nowhere.
They're going nowhere. They're going to nowhere. Or if you are like a Satanist, that could be considered the path. What exactly is the definition of a path anyway? How do you delimit these things down? Is everything just the same? it doesn't. When you start to look at this thing, it doesn't really make any sense anymore. And then you look at the goals that the various religions talk about, and actually they're quite different. These religions here, they talk about God, but they talk about God in very different ways. Can it really be the same thing? In Buddhism, we say there is no God, so how can Buddhism have the same goal as a religion that teaches about God if we don't talk about a God? I remember some years ago I met this Baha'i person. You know the Baha'i religion? That was it was established in Persia and Iran back in the 19th century. It's a very new religion. And they have this idea that all religions are the same. They all go to the same goal. So there was this lady, this was down in St. George's Cathedral in Perth. We had this multi-interfaith thing, or multicultural thing here. And so I said to her, I'm not so sure about that. And she says, oh yes, that's right, your religion too goes up the same mountain. She was very adamant that this was the case. But of course, that is not really the Buddhist point of view, because the Buddhist point of view, there is no such thing as an eternal God, so it gets very problematic. The paths are so various, the destinations are so various, so how can you actually talk about these things? And I think if you have a little bit of a kind of a critical mind, and a mind that distinguishes between these things, it is very obvious that this is a very it's a shallow view, it's an easy view, but the reality is more complicated. Of course, you could say that some paths go maybe part of the way, or some paths, there are some aspects of the paths that are right. You can divide it up in this way, but that they all have the same goal, I think, is not really justified.
Ajahn, before you go further,
please.
One thing what comes to my mind, I remember when I started in Buddhism 20-odd years ago, when I lived in New York, and there's different kind of Buddhist groups, and it's quite a daunting task to when you're starting as a Buddhist. That it seems to be, but everybody's like, okay, we all going to the same destination, but the paths seem to be so different, so varied. Where like let's say. You
mean within Buddhism?
Within Buddhism.
Yeah.
So some say you don't have to believe any of this stuff. You just meditate, and that's good enough. And some say you have to start keeping 5 precepts, and some say you can keep some of the precepts out. And it was quite a difficult for me to get started, because it's quite a varied way of teachings out there. So I guess that some of the stuff will come today, but I think within Buddhism there's a...
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Actually, I wanted to mention that, so it's a good thing that you brought it up. I think it's very true that within Buddhism itself there is a number of paths, and I think there's a number of different destinations within Buddhism.
Destinations.
I do. I think there are some Buddhisms that lead to very different destinations than others.
Right.
I think some of them just lead to a kind of God existence, very similar in some ways to some of these religions. And so there is a lot of variety here, and so it's a very good point. So that is why it is so important, again, to study the early Buddhist texts, the EBTs, to be realistic about what real Buddhism is. Because within 2,500 years of history, you can expect a lot of distortion. You can expect things moving in different ways. The problem with the Buddhist teaching is that it is so revolutionary and so different from everything else. There will be a tendency in the human mind to drive or to make the teaching conform to the craving. The craving is, I want it to be a self, I want it to be God, and then they tend to distort your idea of Buddhism to fit your craving. And I think this is a very big problem that we always have to be on the outlook for.
And I think there was a lot of, they're trying to fit it into the society in your present time. In these days, maybe, drinking a little bit of alcohol is not a problem. It's hard to maybe talk to some people that you should keep the 5 precepts. It's maybe awkward even sometimes. But not just that. I mean, already straight after the time when Buddha passed away, they started to conform with that, with the idea of what was time. It was in India at that time. So it started to develop from there, and we know where it has led.
I think exactly. I think you see that in the Vinaya, the monastic rules and regulations. There's obviously been a historic development of those rules, and I think a lot of those rules, they come precisely from Indian culture, Indian society, and they were incorporated in the Vinaya. No, that's a good point. Okay, so what, I can't remember what my next slide is. Let's see what happens next. Okay. So, but this is what the Buddha says, yeah? He says that, and this is a very famous verse that we have actually mentioned before. Just this is the path, there is no other for the purification of insight. You should practice this path. This is the discombobulation of Mara. Discombobulation is Ajahn Brahma's translation, which is quite nice. I prefer that one, I think. So this is the path. What is this path? Well, it is the Noble Eightfold Path. And the Buddha very clearly says there is no other. This is the path you have to practice. And if you have a certain path, it will lead to a certain goal. If you have a different path, it will lead to a different goal. And it will not lead to the full and final purification of insight. In other words, the full insight into things. It requires a certain path. This is one of those very famous statements. And when you see that, you may think that Buddhism is just like any other religion. We are the best. It's this exclusive access to the truth. Nobody else has the access to the truth in the way that we have, because we are Buddhists. So is this what it means? And the answer is not really. Because Buddhism claims, I suppose it claims, just like other religions, it claims to be a universal teaching. Universal in the sense that it talks about universal aspects, reality as it actually is. That is what we claim. And if we claim that, then it doesn't really make sense to say that, you've got to be a Buddhist. If you're not a Buddhist, you're going to go to, where are you going to go? Anyway, not a pretty bad place if you're not a Buddhist. But that is not really how Buddhism works, because it works on principles, how you live, how you are. It doesn't really matter so much whether you're a Buddhist or not. Still, the Buddha is claiming this is the only path. So how do we make this conform to each other? How can we say this is the only path and at the same time talk about universal principles? And this is the next thing that comes up here, which is a beautiful teaching of the Buddha, this is from the Digha Nikaya, the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. In whatever teaching and training, Dhamma Vinaya, the Noble Eightfold Path is found. There the noble ones are found. The noble ones, the Aryas, those who have purified the insight that we saw before, they are found wherever there is a Noble Eightfold Path.
Ajahn, the Dhamma Vinaya, that was sort of, I was thinking about yesterday when we were thinking about the different ways of misconceptions. The Dhamma Vinaya, well, does it then mean that the lay people are not practicing with because it says the Vinaya there? Okay,
so that is a good question. Let me get back to that in a second, sure. Because it's an important point. So the point about this, is that if you practice the Noble Eightfold Path, it doesn't matter if you are a Buddhist, it doesn't matter if you believe in the Buddha, it doesn't matter if you whatever, what matters is how you live. And this fits with this idea of universal principle. It's not about what you call yourself, it's about how you live that really matters. And this is this beautiful teaching in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. But at the same time, it doesn't matter what you call yourself, but you have to follow this particular path, otherwise it doesn't work. Kind of makes sense, It's but the whole thing sort of is quite beautiful in that way. It's not sort of exclusive to Buddhists, but at the same time, there's a very clear path that you have to follow. And of course, we know from the way the suttas are taught that sometimes we have beings like the Pacceka Buddhas. Pacceka Buddhas, like the individual Buddhas. These are Buddhas that arise but don't actually teach, so they become saints, if you want, or they become, people who live in this world without having any real impact as such. Often sometimes called private Buddhas. Pacceka means like one, patti eka, by themselves, and that makes sense, And then a Buddha arises. Well, when the Buddha arises, is the Buddha a Buddhist? Obviously not. The Buddha comes out of ordinary society and suddenly they have an insight into things. That is the insight they have, but they're not really Buddhist. They just have an insight into reality. And later on we get this institution called the Buddhism. But really it is about insight into reality that it is all about. So it's marvelous teachings, and of course that is where you find the noble ones. So that is, I think, the right way to think about the paths. It's not like all paths lead in the same way, but if you practice the right path, it will lead in the right way, regardless of what you call yourself. So, teaching in Dhamma Vinaya. Yeah. So you're saying this only applies to monastics because this is Dhamma Vinaya. So lay people haven't got a chance. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm thinking.
Okay. Sorry.
Whether I think.
No. So actually, So you can see here the Pali words. Last time we were asked to have some more Pali words. I think it's really nice to have some more Pali words. Sometimes you have to find a balance between too much Pali and whatever, but I think it's a generally nice idea. You can see here the word Dhamma Vinaya. If you look at the Pali, the second line of the Pali, it says Dhamma Vinaye, Ariyo in the second line here. So, and this is very interesting because Dhamma Vinaya is usually understood to mean the Dhamma on the one hand. Dhamma is the teaching of the Buddha, that's the Dhamma. And Vinaya, that is then often understood to be the monastic regulations or the monastic rules, is often considered the Vinaya. But if you look at the suttas, the way the word Vinaya is used, it is actually used in a slightly different way in the earliest part of the suttas. What it means like it is used in a sense of training. So the Dhamma is the teaching, like the doctrine, the theory, if you like, and the Vinaya is the practice that we do as a consequence of that teachings. So it's like theory and practice. Doctrine and how we express that doctrine in real life. So when we keep the 5 precepts, that's Vinaya. When you read about the 5 precepts in the suttas, that's Dhamma. So it's like the understanding, the knowledge, and then it is the expression of that knowledge in how we live our lives. That is Dhamma. So you are on the path. You're okay after all, So you can, you're okay. You can still stay and carry on with this. And there the noble ones are found, and of course that means that then you can have noble ones both among monastics and among lay people. There isn't really there is no absolute distinction between monastics and lay people. The biggest distinction is that we look a bit more funny than you, but otherwise it is largely the same. Of course, there is the advantage of being a monastic. You have the whole support of the rules and all the things that the Buddha laid down. He obviously laid it down for a reason, but in the end there isn't any absolute barrier between the two. Anyway, so that is the first about the
9 o'clock
myths. So what is next? Okay, that's the next one. But let's stop. I think we should stop there because
that go to the next topic.
Anything more we should say about that?
I can't think of anything now, but maybe we should.
Let's have a quick meditation break, and then we can have a couple of questions if you like. Yes, Okay, everyone. So let's carry on. So, any questions about the paths? Whether all paths go in the same direction, go the same mountain peak or not? Anyone want to say anything about that? Everyone is happy that the Noble Eightfold Path is the only path.
There is a question at the. Could you take the microphone, please?
Yeah.
We
Okay.
will ask you.
Dilusha. Yeah. Yeah. Please take the microphone.
Ajahn, in one of your slides, you were talking about, it described how the Buddhas said this is essentially the only path,
Yeah.
the Noble Eightfold Path. I've heard in various descriptions of the sutras a similar statement about the Satipatthana.
Oh, okay.
Now,
Okay.
I can see how the Satipatthana is part of the Noble Eightfold Path, but not the other way around.
Yeah.
Could you clarify that a little bit?
Yeah. I don't think it says in exactly those words that Satipatthana is the kind of full path and only path. It may say other things about Satipatthana, that is an essential ingredient or something like that, but it doesn't say, I think, anywhere that it is complete in its own right. For example, it says that Satipatthana only works if it's practiced on Ujjuka Ditti and the Sila. So you have to have Ditti and Sila first of all, specifically said in a number of sutras. But I think the point is that if you practice Satipatthana in the right way, it actually includes all the 8 factors. So if you look at the Satipatthana Sutta, how the Satipatthana Sutta is expressed, it talks about contemplation of things that only happen if you have samadhi. Yeah, it talks about the contemplation of the Mahagata Chitta. It's the large, the broad mind, or the Appamana Chitta, I think, the measureless mind. And all of these things are terms for jhana states or the Brahma Viharas practiced to the highest limit, or the Vimutta Chitta, yeah, which again is the liberated mind. So in other words, it is actually included in Satipatthana. Satipatthana usually, as you say, is the cause for Sammasamadhi. But when it comes to the Satipatthana Sutta, there the contemplation of the jhanas is actually included in the Satipatthana practice. So there's different angles in that point of view. But you're quite right. There is no such thing as just Satipatthana being the only path. Yeah.
I think we lost about 95% of the people on that question. But
Okay, okay. Anyway, go listen to the recording later on, maybe you get it right.
no, but I mean, it's just talking about Satipatthana. Yeah.
Satipatthana is the 7th factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, yeah? And Dilusha was saying that sometimes it is said that all you have to do is Satipatthana, yeah? So how is that possible? If Satipatthana is the 7th factor, and you have to practice all 8, this is the only path, how can Satipatthana be everything? That's basically the question here. So, does that make sense? Yeah? So I apologize. Sometimes, please pipe up. Yeah? If I'm talking things and you are new, I know some of you are quite new to the Dhamma, please just ask and tell us off for not explaining properly, using Pali words without thinking. After a while, when you've been a monk for a long time, it's almost like you get this kind of specialized vocabulary that you use. Yeah, it's like all vocations have that. You have a kind of specialized in-jokes that you can only understand if you're a monk. Nobody else can understand it. And it's a bit like that, unfortunately. So please stop us and ask. Yeah. Any other questions about this? Yeah, please.
Hybrid English, Pali.
This is not about the Eightfold Path or anything, but something you mentioned in your talk now, just mentioned that lay people and monastic has no difference, which puzzled me actually. Can you elaborate on that? Because what do you mean by that?
Okay. What I mean is that if you practice the Noble Eightfold Path, if you practice the teachings properly, then there is no difference. It's about the practice that matters. If you fulfill the 8 factors and you practice them properly, then it doesn't matter whether you are a lay person or a monastic. But it might be easier to fulfill the 8 factors if you are a monastic, for example. Yeah. So the principles are the same, but there might be one situation might be more conducive to the practice than the other one. But there is no essential difference. And sometimes when you look at the people in the world, sometimes you see lay people who are practicing like, it's just mind-boggling how they practice. They kind of live a life just like monastics, and they are better than 98% of monastics, in terms of their keeping their precepts and their meditation. So sometimes you find lay people who are very, very impressive, and sometimes you find monastics who are not very impressive at all. You think, jeepers, what are they doing with their life? But in general, in average, you will find that the monastic path is more powerful because it is more conducive to the practice of the Noble Eightfold Path. Renunciation is one of the factors on the path, and of course, as a monastic, you're more geared towards that. You have things like solitude, viveka, on the monastic path, much more easily accessible as a monastic. You have very good kalyana mittas on the monastic path. You have we all have the Buddha, but you have Ajahn Brahm, you have Venerable Mudito,
Ajahn Brahmali.
You have all the venerable nuns. You have Venerable Metaji. So you have like really good people who all pull in the same direction, which is very, very powerful. So monastic life has many advantages, but the basic principles can be practiced whether you're a layperson or a monastic. Yeah. Okay. So that's 2 questions. So we're limiting to 2 questions now. So if you don't like that, then complain later on there. So let's move on to the second misconception or myth. Do you want to add anything? Sorry, Mudito?
No, I think...
You all right? Yeah? Okay.
10 past 10.
So this is going to be controversial.
Yep.
So this is the Bodhisatta or Bodhisattva path is an alternative to the Noble Eightfold Path. N8P means Noble Eightfold Path, just reminding you. And whenever you see N8P, Noble Eightfold Path. So, the Bodhisattva path, very common path in Buddhism. It is very common in Mahayana Buddhism, of course, because that is often one of the main things you do in Mahayana Buddhism. But it is also quite common in Theravada Buddhism. You may not know that, but it's actually very common in both Mahayana and Theravada. So, I don't really want to criticize any type of Buddhism as such, but what I want to but I just want to compare this idea of Bodhisattva path to the Noble Eightfold Path. So very common around the world. So for that reason, we need to ask, is it really a valid alternative? Sometimes they say it's better than the Noble Eightfold Path. But let's just stick with a more basic question. Is it a valid alternative? Can you practice the Bodhisattva path instead of the Noble Eightfold Path?
One thing I want to say about this is the Bodhisattva path is basically what you're aiming is to be a Buddha. So the key difference here is we are aiming to be fully enlightened as well, but the Bodhisattvas are sort of like continuing in this path until they become Buddhas. So always remember when you see Bodhisattva, they're aiming to be Buddhas. That's what the aim is on.
Thank you. That's good. That's great. It's good to kind of set out all the details so everyone is on board. So that's the Bodhisattva path versus the Noble Eightfold Path. What did the Buddha himself teach? Did he teach one or the other or both or neither or what? So let's see what we have here. So the first thing I want to discuss is the word Bodhisattva, Bodhisattva, often understood Bodhi. The word Bodhi means like awakening, and Sattva is understood very often to mean like being, so something like awakening being. In other words, a person who is moving towards Bodhi. That's kind of the idea of the word Bodhisattva. The first question that we need to ask, is it used in the early Buddhist texts? We call that the EBTs. Is this word found in the early Buddhist texts? And for those of you who have been around for a while, you will know that it is found. It is found in this particular phrase, and only in this phrase in the early Buddhist text. It's the only place that is found. And this particular phrase is found maybe, 5 to 10 times maybe in the suttas. And it is found whenever the Buddha talks about his life before his awakening. That's when it's found. I don't know if... this is the Pali here, Pubbeva Sambodha Anabhisambuddhassa bodhisatta seva satto. So you can see the bodhisattva there is there. That's the bodhisatta. Yeah, you can see it in there, hiding away in the middle of that conglomeration of letters. Bodhisatta. Yes, this is actually found in the early suttas. So if it is found in the early suttas, what exactly does it mean? Yeah, this is kind of becomes very important. Does it refer to Bodhisattva as we now understand it, as a separate path, or does it perhaps refer to something else? So let's have a look at some of the translations that are given for this, typically in the suttas. This is the first translation. This is by Bhikkhu Bodhi here. Yeah, this is the translation of exactly those words you saw now. Before my enlightenment, while I was still only an unenlightened bodhisatta. It's not all that helpful, yeah? It's just using the word bodhisatta again. So, but you can see here the basic idea is before my enlightenment. That is when you are a bodhisattva according to the EBTs, yeah? While I was still unenlightened bodhisatta. So, and this is one of the main distinctions in the early Buddhist texts compared to later tradition, is that in the early Buddhist text, the idea of bodhisattva is the Buddha talking about his last life before his awakening, before he kind of becomes the Buddha. Yeah, he's still the Buddha to be, practicing, trying to become enlightened. It's in this last life, yeah, after he renounces the home life and he's practicing to become a Buddha. At that time, he is a bodhisatta. Yeah, you can see. So it's a very short period of time that this word is used. There is some exemptions, some exceptions. There's one famous exception for that. That is found in a sutta called the Acharya Abhuta Sutta, the wonderful and marvelous, found in the Majjhima Nikaya, number 123 in the Majjhima Nikaya, and it is about all the amazing things that happened when the Buddha was born, yeah, or just after his birth, or even slightly prior to his birth. And in that sutta is one of the few places where the idea of bodhisattva seems to be used also for the life just before this last life of the Buddha. Yeah, so that's one of the few. But that sutta is it already shows kind of a development of later doctrine in it. Sometimes the early suttas have been developed later on, they have had material added to them, yeah, and the way to understand that is to do what we call comparative study of the suttas, compare the various versions of it, and by doing that you can kind of distill down the earliest kind of word of the Buddha by doing that. So you have the suttas in Chinese translation from different schools, and sometimes in Tibetan, in Sanskrit or whatever, and then you compare these things, and then you kind of distill what is the essence, the Buddha word, if you like. And when you do that, you find that this particular sutta has a lot of elements to it that were added later. Why? Because these different versions of the sutta are so very different. There's lots of things added and lots of things that are not the same. So that is the only place, yeah? And it's kind of interesting that wherever you see the idea of bodhisattva used differently, already you have a tendency to lateness, a tendency to developed ideas beyond how the Buddha taught. So what then could bodhisattva mean? And the word bodhisattva, the point about this word, it can be understood in different ways. And this is a very important point, because a word like satta can actually be Pali is a word where one word often has a large number of different meanings. Yeah, so there is an alternative meaning to this word, and the word satta can be equivalent to what is in Sanskrit called sakta, and sakta means someone who is intent on something. Yeah, so I think, and this idea was first proposed by a man. He was the professor of Sanskrit at Oxford University, and he was the one who proposed this first. And I think it is a very good, very right proposal that in the suttas it does not mean awakening being, it means one person who is intent on awakening here, which makes very good sense. And then you start to understand why it is called bodhisatta in the suttas. Because the moment the Buddha renounces the household life, the reason why he renounces the household life is precisely because he is intent on awakening here. Yeah, remember the story of the Buddha. he thinks about old age and death, about illness. And then there's the story, which may not be so true, about, he sees the messengers or whatever. But his main thing is this idea of seeing death and seeing the kind of there must be something more to life. You can't just go around attaching to all of these things and then die afterwards. I want to seek a solution to this. Yeah, the Buddha is intent on awakening, and that is why he renounces the household life. So it's a beautiful way of thinking about this. And so then you have the translation like this. Before my awakening, while I was still unawakened, but intent on awakening. Yeah, intent, this is the Buddha after he renounces the household life. This translation is by Bhante Sujato. Yeah, and very often, not always, but very often I kind of see eye to eye with Ajahn Sujato, the way he translates. And in this case, I think his translation is preferable to the one by Bhikkhu Bodhi. I don't mean any disrespect to Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, he is a marvelous translator, but I think in this case, this is more correct. So this is the difference between the two, yeah? And this is what Bodhisattva means in the early suttas. So this is the first point about this, yeah? So then what? I think, then what happens next?
I think you almost preemptively talked all my points already.
Oh, that's terrible.
Anyway, sometimes repetition is good. So I was just listening to you and like, oh no, you took that point. Okay, so now, all right. So in Nikayas, we often see monks approach the Buddha and ask for advice to how to attain arahantship. So the monks never go in the early Buddhist scriptures. They never go to Buddha and say, "How can we become a Buddha?" They ask how to become an arahant, how to become fully enlightened one, but meaning that they use the word arahantship. So it seems reasonable to suppose that those who aspired to Buddhahood would have done the same, that the Buddha would have responded, and the Buddha would have responded in a fitting way. So, but there is no aspiration to do that.
Why not?
Well,
why wouldn't they?
Why would
aspire to become Buddha as well?
Why would they? Yeah, well, I mean, if you see somebody nice, you want to be like that, don't you? It's like you see, I don't know, when you're young,
you see a Buddha, I think, I want to be a Buddha.
I know.
Yeah. So how come they didn't aspire to be a Buddha? Huh? That's interesting.
Well, that is interesting. I know. Yeah. Why did they ask these questions? It's like, there's so many questions, and they never. Okay, let's see what happens. I don't know.
Okay.
Then the question arises: why we don't find even trace of teachings of Bodhisattva path in our text? And this is the things where we don't have the path. It's okay. The word Ajahn Brahmali was teaching, the Bodhisattva, Bodhisatta, as we say in Pali. The word is there, but it means something else. There is no really path to do that. Do you understand the difference? There is that, Ajahn Brahmali is talking about that, there is mention about Bodhisatta, but there is no path to become a Bodhisatta there.
Or Buddha, yeah.
Or Buddha. Oh, rather, there is no path to become a Buddha. It's a bit strange. Okay. If there is a causal background to the realization of enlightenment as the Buddha rather than Arahant, why are the Nikayas silent about it? The Nikayas meaning our texts. And the Buddha here in a small, instead of capital, it's in, to mean Buddha. Buddha mean enlightened ones, the Buddhas rather in all that. Why if there is a background to that, the Buddha must have become the Buddha somehow, but the Nikayas are silent about it, right? Why don't they point to the possibility of Buddhahood itself as an object, as an aspiration? Why don't they even have the Buddhahood as an, it's there. Why do they always change the word? They talk about the Buddha, but why do they always, when they go and ask the Buddha, they always talk about Arahant? Why isn't there even a possibility there? We have all these looming questions.
In other words, you're saying that if there was a Bodhisattva path, you would expect to find something about it in the suttas. But so the fact that you don't find anything is a bit strange.
It's not word in any way. I mean, whether they maybe would use something else instead of arhatship path or some, or, I mean, rather the Bodhisattva path, then maybe they use some other way, means of, telling the Buddha, like, how did you become that, the way you are. There is maybe text in what happens when they tell what Buddha was before he was Buddha in the early text. We didn't think about that yesterday, but there are stories like that in Nikayas, right? Where the Buddha says, before, in the previous lives. You know what I'm pointing towards? It's
like Gatikara Sutta, that's what
yeah,
I'm saying. Yeah.
It's like this, all these things, aspirations and this and that. I think.
Actually, that's actually a very important point, because when you look at the suttas where the Buddha talks about his past lives, then there is no indication at all that he was on a path and practicing towards the Buddhahood. In fact, the exact opposite is the case. One of the most famous suttas, I should have added this here, but I didn't even think about it, but one of the most famous suttas about the Buddha's past life is is the Gatikara Sutta, found in the Majjhima Nikaya, number 82? 3? Something like that. 82, I think it is. Anyway. And in the Gatikara Sutta, this is supposedly a past life of the Buddha, and it may well be. In this sutta, the Buddha is a Brahmin, and this Brahmin, he has a friend, and then this friend says to this Brahmin, who is the future Buddha, he says, "Let's go and see the Buddha. The Buddha Kassapa is around. We want to come and see the Buddha." And then this future Buddha, who was supposed to become Buddha Gautama in the future, said, forget about those Buddhas. I don't believe anything about that. This is, just nonsense. Let's not go there. We don't want anything to do with it. He's very, very resistant. And his friend Gatikara, who he has to keep on persuading him, and do some very extraordinary stuff to persuade him to come and visit the Buddha. And then eventually, okay, and he kind of drags him along there. And eventually he listens to him. And when he listens to him, of course, then he thinks, wow, this is really good stuff. But this doesn't give the impression of someone who is on the path. It gives the exact opposite impression. Someone who is very resistant to hearing the Buddha's teachings.
That's
so
right.
It is almost the opposite of the idea of someone who's on the path. And there are many stories. Another famous story is in the Pacheka, what's it called? Pachekana Sutta? Anyway, it's in the Pachetana Sutta. It's in the Anguttara 3s, I think number 15 or thereabouts, and that is a story of also another past life of the Buddha, where he is a wheelwright. In other words, someone who makes wheels. A wheelwright is someone who produces wheels. And there he is it's a very low occupation, in Indian society, considered one of the very basic ones. And there he makes wheels for the king. And the king says, "I'm going to war. I need a new wheel for my war chariot." It seemed like the king had one war chariot.
Everything was the wheel. I can't go to war.
Very small scale. This is kind of interesting about things in ancient India as well. Everything was very small scale. It's hard to know, but anyway, he needs a new wheel for his war chariot. Can you make it for me? And then this Bodhisattva, he makes a wheel for the war chariot of the king. And that's really what the story is about. And the story is about how good he was at making wheels. And then, it goes on, because he's so good at making wheels, that's why he became such a good Buddha in the future, because he had that intention to do things well. But there's nothing there about practicing the path. In fact, if anything, making wheels so that people can go to war is almost the opposite of practicing the path. Okay, here's your wheel. Now you can go and have lots of violence and kill people with, as you like. So, and this is kind of something you see almost throughout the suttas, that when the Buddha talks about his past lives, there's no indication that he is on a path. In fact, the indication is the exact opposite, that he's not on a path at all.
Right.
He is blind, just like everyone else.
Right. But he just happens to almost stumble across teachings. Let me see what I... okay, so why, the third question, why do they include no description of Bodhisattva career? This is from Bhikkhu Bodhi's... there was quite a long article, but I just sort of took the points out of the article. So why isn't there any description of the Bodhisattva career if it is actually like a reasonable, if it is a path like it is promoted these days? Why do the archaic text? And there were some answers maybe in the bigger Buddhist in this, if you want to go and read this article. He was speculating maybe it was too, like he didn't want to, like the Buddha said, these are the leaves in my hand, I just teach you what you need to know. Maybe he knew something else, but he didn't want to teach. He would have maybe discombobulated everybody. It's like, oh yeah, by the way, there's this Bodhisattva path, but actually you should follow this path as well. So maybe it's too complicated. He didn't want to. He just wanted to teach one path, one answer, perhaps. I don't know. What else did he mention there? Why wasn't there no description? I can't remember now from too many, but it was just basically what it boils down to. There is no mention about this actually, like this career path in our Nikayas. And it all seems to be becoming later development of Buddhism. So the Bodhisattva path to become, if you being aspirant to be a Buddha.
Yeah, but that leads us to a few questions, that are interesting. If there is no indication in the early Buddhist texts of a Bodhisattva path, I think that is fairly clear. That even though the word Bodhisattva or Bodhisatta occurs, there's no indication of a path. And that leads to the question, well, why then is there such an idea? Where does that come from, the idea of a Bodhisattva path? And that's question number one. And the second one is, how does a Buddha arise if there is no Bodhisattva path?
Right.
These are the two questions we then have to answer, because otherwise it's very difficult to understand what is going on. So again, the Buddha says there is no path, just this is the path, there is no other for the purification of insight. By saying that, you're almost already excluding the Bodhisattva path. Because you are saying that there is only this path, it's the Noble Eightfold Path, which leads to arahantship. So that is kind of enough. But then, and then he never teaches anything apart from the Noble Eightfold Path in the suttas. And this is such an important thing in its own right. If the Buddha doesn't teach anything apart from the Noble Eightfold Path, if we take the Buddha as our teacher, if we take the Buddha's teaching as the gold standard, the root that we should all look to find out what we should practice, then why should we practice a Bodhisattva path when this is what the Buddha teaches? It is a very good question. Well, why should we? Whose path are we practicing if we're practicing the Bodhisattva path? We're not practicing the path of the Buddha, so whose path are we practicing? Where does that path come from? This is such an interesting question. If you have later ideas in Buddhism that are not found in the suttas, where do those ideas come from? And a lot of these ideas, remember that many of these ideas, they don't really have an author. When you get the Pali text, the only author we know is the Buddha, and then you have a few authors like maybe Venerable Sariputta, and then you have some of the monks and nuns in the Theragatha and Therigatha who authored those verses. But the vast majority of Buddhist texts, they don't really have an author. They are anonymous texts. Idea like the Bodhisattva path, is found in the Pali text, is found in a collection called the Charya Pitaka, which talks about the path of the Buddha before he became enlightened. That is where it is found. And who wrote that text? Nobody knows. It's anonymous. And this is very problematic. We can choose either, on the one hand, to take on board the teachings of the Buddha that we know is the early Buddhist text, or we can take on a path, like the Bodhisattva path, written by anonymous people. We have no idea who they are, whether they were enlightened or not, whether they had any real insight or not. These things are very obscure. So we have the choice. And I would say it is very dangerous to start practicing a path that is laid down by someone who is anonymous, who we don't know anything about. We have no idea where it's going to lead. Our choice should obviously be, in my opinion anyway, to follow what the Buddha taught. That is what it means to be a disciple of the Buddha. That is what it means to be a true Buddhist, to follow the teachings of the Buddha himself. And this is one of the things that the Buddha, again, we were just talking a second ago about how the Buddha didn't really seem to be on the path, in his previous life. And this is another indication of that. where he said, this is from the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the sutta on the Buddha's passing away. Mendicants, monks and nuns, not understanding, not penetrating the four noble truths, both you and I, both you and I have wandered and transmigrated for such a very long time. The Buddha is saying here that he has wandered and transmigrated. He's not on a path, he's just wandering around, transmigrating, just like anyone else. He's not really on a Bodhisattva path. This is what this seems to indicate, right?
Ajahn, before you go, I think that the one thing for me as well, sometimes I feel a fear coming up, what's going to happen in next lifetime. You just don't know. We keep wondering and wondering, and it's actually very long time. With this path, if it was Bodhisattva path, it's as if you have this clear path and you're following it, and you're never gonna, get out of it. It's sort of like I have aspiration, and you're gonna move along with this path, and you're gonna become a Buddha. Somewhere, and good luck with that one. Hard enough as it is.
I think that's a really good point, and people maybe that is one of the psychological reasons behind the Bodhisattva path. You want to feel safe in the future that you're carrying on with this path, you're not going to lose it again. That could be one of the psychological reasons behind it that drives this kind of ideas. So interesting. And then comes the kind of the our favorite monk is coming again.
Third cup for the tea.
Which side?
You wonder how we talk so fast?
This is why we talk so fast. This is how it happens. Thank you. So should we talk even faster? No, we shouldn't talk faster. Okay. So then how did the Buddha reach awakening if he didn't practice a path? And this becomes the next important point. How did it actually happen? And the answer is that sometimes it happens more or less by just the right conditions coming together, the right person with the right qualities, living in the right society at the right time and place, all of these things coming together, and then bang, you get the Buddha. Boom, oi. So that is how, and it is just like you can imagine, there are, if you look at people in our society, in general, not just Buddhists, but anyone really, you will notice that there are certain people who just happen to live well. Why do they live well? Well, it's not because they are Buddhists, not because they are practicing a path, but just because they have been conditioned in a certain way. Maybe the parents taught them the right way, or they had good teachers, or they had some good spiritual guides. But it's not as if they are on a path that kind of stretches back into infinity in the past. It is just that conditions come together. And the Buddha is just an extreme example of that, all conditions coming together. He obviously had practiced some meditation in the past life, so that in this life, when he sits down under the rose apple tree as a child, he spontaneously goes into meditation. Obviously, it must be because he practiced meditation in the past life. So he brings a lot of good qualities with him into this life. And then in this life, he's very sharp, he has very powerful spiritual qualities, so that it enables him to make that breakthrough. That is how it happens. So it's more like a natural process, certain things coming together, and then a Buddha comes out of it. And that is why a Buddha is really a natural principle. It's a principle of nature. Every now and again, someone, some person, somewhere will have the right qualities, they will make the breakthrough, and then you have a new Buddha arising in the world. That seems to be the explanation in the suttas. The suttas just says, a Buddha arises, Tathagata uppajjati, Tathagata arises in the world, or Buddha, I can't remember, uppajjati. That's really all it seems to be saying in the suttas. So it is not, there's no indication that it is a result of the path. So if it isn't a result of a path, and to me it doesn't really make that much sense to talk about the path that goes over many lifetimes. How do you remember that path? How do you know what you're supposed to do?
That's actually, I think, an interesting misconception. It's quite often people think, you live a good life and you study Buddhism, you will remember that next lifetime. You have to be very careful with that kind of idea that try to aspire to get out of here this lifetime if you can,
Yeah.
because you never know what's going to happen next.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And exactly it. And this is what the Buddha says. Now is the time to make the effort. Yeah, he's talking about this all the time in the suttas, because the future is just so uncertain. Now is the time. Now is the opportunity.
Yeah.
So it's almost the exact opposite of having this idea of carrying on in the future.
Carrying on, and you're going to remember. You're going to follow the path, and
So there is a very big downside with that Bodhisattva idea, that it actually makes you maybe a bit complacent even.
right?
Can do.
It could.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, we're really hammering the Bodhisattva path.
Sorry.
So then the question comes: where does the Bodhisattva path come from? This is the next thing which I just want to talk about very briefly, because otherwise we're going to be here for a long time. There is some very good literature on this online, and for those of you who are interested, I would recommend you to read a book by Venerable Analayo called The Genesis of the Bodhisattva Ideal, or something like that. You can find it online. It's for free, and it's one of the best studies I am aware of on the arising of the Bodhisattva ideal. And what you find the kind of in the embryonic form of the Bodhisattva ideal is already found in the early suttas. I already mentioned the Acharya Abhuta Sutta before, and you find a few little bits and pieces like that kind of start to get the feeling for the arising of the Bodhisattva ideal. So this would have been an idea that started to arise after the Buddha passed away. And the reason seems to be, and this seems to be a universal reason that happens wherever you have someone who is really special. Imagine having someone like the Buddha around. We have Ajahn Brahma, but if the Buddha is even kind of, imagine having the Buddha around. Someone that you rely on all the time for advice in a spiritual practice, whether you are a monk or a lay person, someone who has this wisdom to always know what you're supposed to do. It's like a parent, the kind of supreme parent who always kind of guides you in the right direction. Imagine having someone there that you rely on so fully for laying down the rules, teaching the path, and then one day this person dies. It's bad enough to lose a parent, but imagine losing someone who is kind of who points out the very meaning of life to you. Everything, it is. You can imagine the feeling in the Buddhist community, the sense of a vacuum, the sense of loss, the sense of there being something irreplaceable that has been lost. And from that, and this is, I think, a very well-known historical situation, is that from that then arises the need to try to understand who the Buddha was. And then the stories start to come around. That is why after the Buddha passed away, we start to get more stories about the Buddha. About the life of the Buddha, who he was. All the stories about the life of the Buddha came after the Buddha passed away. In the Pali tradition, it's called the Jataka Nidana. Nidana is like the source. Jataka are the birth stories, past lives of the Buddha. This is the source of the Jataka, and that is where you find the longest exposition on the life of the Buddha, but it was written a long time after the Buddha. That's why you find all the details about the Buddha living in the palace in the large city of Kapilavatthu, and riding on the horse Kantaka and jumping over the city walls, and then shaving off his hair. And then it's all very kind of, you can see how you can make a really nice movie out of that. And then he goes forth, and all of that comes. And that is all found in the Jataka Nidana. All of these things happen after the Buddha has passed away. And I think it is fair to say it happened as a consequence of the sense of loss that was felt in the Buddhist community. And from that, once you start to talk about the Buddha and you start to think about him, from that the Bodhisattva ideal arises. Because this is really about understanding the past of the Buddha. Who was the Buddha? Where did he come from? How was he able to become a Buddha? All of these questions would have been part of that. And then the Bodhisattva ideal starts to arise. So I think this is personally I think is a very good explanation, is that it comes from the sense of missing someone, lack in the Buddhist community, a sense of need to fill in the gaps in a sense. And the whole path arises out of that after the time of the Buddha. This is not to say that the Bodhisattva path is entirely wrong or anything like that. The vast majority of the Bodhisattva path is almost identical to the Noble Eightfold Path. In that sense, it is not wrong. But the whole idea of doing things over multiple lifetimes, of adding new factors, and all of that, that is where you start to gradually, almost imperceptibly move away from the early teachings. And eventually your lead comes to the point where the Bodhisattva ideal becomes the thing to do, and everything else becomes kind of pushed by the wayside. The early teachings get lost, and you're left with something that is much later and not as original. So now we have really kind of gone for it, really. Yeah, okay. So, Venerable, you want to say anything, add anything more, or?
No, but I mean, I think there's a good idea. I mean, it feels good in the human mind to, do good, purify your mind, and then you continue on this path. And they sort of leave quite a lot of things out of the Noble Eightfold Path out. But as a human, it feels nice to do good things, and you're sort of like purifying your mind over the lifetimes, continuing on the Bodhisattva path. So I can see why it would be
attractive,
nice path to live.
Yeah. I think too it's very attractive to people. Yeah, I think that's very true. Yeah. So the idea of kind of carrying on, maybe I can't do it in this life, so then I have to carry on. But I think, I always thought that one of the dangers of the Bodhisattva path is that it too easily becomes something that speaks to the ego. The ego says, yeah, I want to be a Buddha. Yeah, Buddha is the best. Why should I, settle for arahant, a mere arahant? What do arahants know?
It's even second. It's like, arahant is like second best.
Second best. It becomes second best, and you want to the highest, and it becomes something that the ego very easily grasps onto because it is so high. And then, of course, it's going to lead in the opposite direction, going to lead away from the Dhamma in a sense, if the ego starts to grasp onto it.
Correct. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. Should we have a meditation break?
Yes, and I'm going to use the toilet.
Yeah, let's have a quick meditation break. Okay. So, any questions, please? You can get ready while we pour the coffee over here. Important job.
No? Who wants to be a bodhisattva?
I got one over here.
Oh, okay. Oh, you got the one.
Yeah.
You know the slide with the passage where you had the short passage that mentions the term bodhisatta? I was just wondering, okay, you can pull it up.
This one here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in that short passage itself, it doesn't actually indicate that this refers only to his being an enlightened bodhisattva in this life, in his last life. So I'm just wondering was it the context of where the passage came from that led you to believe that?
Because basically the context is always, the Buddha talking about his practice after he went forth. So when I was, before my enlightenment, when I was a bodhisattva, I was practicing in this particular way. So he's always talking about his practice after he left the home life. So that seems to be always the context in these things, with the exception, again, of the Acharya Buddha Sutta. Yeah.
So when you said the 5 times it's mentioned, it's always in that context of talking about this.
Yeah, as far as I can remember, that's pretty much what it is. So it's 5, I would say probably more than 5, maybe 10 times altogether in the suttas, something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And those mentions, like in that sutta about the wheelmaker, are those very rare, or do they come up, I don't know, like what's the sort of idea of how often it comes up where there are mentions of his previous lives?
How often that's mentioned?
Yeah.
There's a few suttas where the Buddha talks about his past lives. But the question is how many of those are authentic and how many are not. I think the most authentic one is the Pachetana Sutta from the Anguttara Nikaya, precisely because it is so humble. Yeah, it is incredibly humble. The Buddha is kind of wheelwright, is kind of the bottom of the social hierarchy in India. He's making wheels for the king, He was a good wheelwright, but apart from that, it's very, very humble. And to me, that speaks to authenticity. It's like the principle, again, of the idea of the most unusual reading is more likely to be correct, because who would feel comfortable adding this into the suttas unless it was authentic? It's like, everyone wants to praise the Buddha, make him exceptional. So you have the Mahasudassana Sutta in the Digha Nikaya 17, is about this fabulous king who lived sometime in the past, and everything is just so absolutely fabulous. And then towards the end of the sutta, that was the Buddha in the past life. Yeah, that's kind of what you would expect, because everyone wants to praise the Buddha and lift him up and make him somebody special. That's usually the way it works. And the Mahagovinda Sutta, similar kind of thing. So there are a few suttas like that where the Buddha supposedly talks about his past lives. How many are authentic? I think I have my doubts if how many of them actually are authentic past lives of the Buddha. Yeah.
Okay. But either way.
Yeah.
I mean, the way you talked about the Bodhisattva path, it seemed to be that it has to be something different from the Noble Eightfold Path, and that's why the evidence is all sort of, presented that way. But I'm wondering whether or not it's possible to conceive of it as being no different, that it's always Eightfold Path. It's just like maybe you're sitting on the same bus, it's just a matter of on the same road, it's just a matter of when you want to get off the bus. So if that's another way to conceive it.
Whether you decide it or not, I mean, it's just natural course. But
I'm sorry?
It's not like you decide to get out of the bus. This is more
well, it does depend on your aspiration, right? So that would depend on whether you aspire to be an arhat or you aspire to be a fully awakened Buddha. And that would determine when you want to pull the cord. That's like, okay, I'm getting off the bus now. But I'm just putting that out there as another possible way to conceive of it.
No, there is a lot of similarity, and I think you're right that basically it is the same thing. Yeah, I mean, in the Bodhisattva path we talk about the 10 paramis, and Mahayana the 6 paramis. And they are in many ways similar. There are a few differences. You have the adhitthana parami, for example, which is not really found in the ordinary path. Adhitthana means like determination, so it's like the perfection of determination. And if you ask Ajahn Brahm, he would be he wouldn't like that at all, probably. So there is that. But I think the biggest problem with it is not so much the content of the path. The problem really is with the idea of a path that goes over different lifetimes. I think that to me is the biggest problem with it, because it assumes that you can somehow you can establish a seed within yourself that will then sprout in each lifetime. You carry on with the same things, but is that really possible? The Buddha certainly didn't teach that. And if the Buddha didn't teach it, is it worthwhile taking the risk that is even possible? I find it a very risky business. Once you move outside of what the Buddha taught, in my opinion, you are moving into risky territory.
When you're saying that it's the idea is that the path is over many lifetimes, meaning that it's preordained or that it's sort of guaranteed that it will unfold like whatever 4 years of college or kind of thing like that. Is that what you mean? But the idea that you have to cultivate over many lifetimes, because even in the Arahant path, it seems quite common to think of it as, it might take you many lifetimes. Don't worry if you don't make it this time, because it's very hard, and just keep working at it. And that you do have to cultivate these various qualities, whether you call them paramis or not. Just whatever qualities that are part of the path. That it could take a while. So I don't find that idea so foreign.
But the thing is that yes, you may have to do that, but there's no guarantee that you will be able to do it. It depends on the causes. The Buddha never says that is how we should think about the path. The Buddha says that now is urgent, now you have the opportunity. Okay, so let's say that you are lucky and you kind of end up in a suitable place in your next life with suitable teachers, then you can carry on. But there's no guarantee that you were able to do that. It's very uncertain. But if you are lucky, maybe you will be able to carry on in the future life. Sometimes this is said in the sense that, you optimize the possibility of carrying on in the future life by practicing well in this life, by learning the teachings properly, and then you will kind of be drawn towards those teachings in the future life. But the uncertainty is just so great, and there isn't any automatic. It's not automatic. It's not as if there is a path which is laid out, which is automatic. You may quite possibly you will lose it all, and you won't carry on.
Okay, so that was your main objection, is the sense of it being guaranteed. Then the other question is, I don't know, you said something at some point about how the Buddha, it's just timing and then bang, it just happens. But nonetheless, didn't it require him to have cultivated, in order to become someone fully awakened, you can't just be an average Joe who happened to be in the right time, the right place. It requires qualities that had to have been developed. So even though he might have been, you said in the Gatikara Sutta, he's obstreperous, doesn't want to see the Buddha and that kind of thing. But still, he must have cultivated other qualities or something to make him ready, so that when he did hear the Buddha, he was like, okay, got it, very good. So something like, I guess my feeling is that even though there isn't a preordained path, there's still a sense of the Buddha, even our Buddha, practicing over various lifetimes, cultivating qualities.
But it's like anyone practicing, It's like anyone that's my point with an ordinary person. You see someone in this life, they may be practicing well, but they would do that for all kinds of reasons. It's nothing to do with a path which is going in a certain direction or not. It may just be the circumstances that would make you be kind in this life, And the same thing with the Buddha. He probably did the right thing in the past life, but not as an outcome of practicing a particular path or practicing in a particular direction. It's just that he happened to be in the right circumstances, so he developed good qualities. Just like people in this life happen to be in the right circumstances, so you practice, you improve your good qualities. But it's not the idea that the Buddha practiced a path, that he must have been practicing a past life. If you say he must have been practicing in the past life, it sounds like he's on the path. But that's the way. But if he did practice in the past life, it's just like everyone in this life, in the world here. Lots of people here practice in a good way. Lots of people are not Buddhist, practice in a good way. It's got nothing to do with that they're on a path. It's just that situation is like that.
The Buddha didn't aspire to be a Buddha, in a sense. He didn't have in the past.
Until this last life. But even then, he didn't aspire to be a Buddha. I just aspired to find the solution to death and suffering.
Right.
Yeah.
The aspiration.
Yeah. Anyway, that's how I see things, and you are very welcome to disagree. But that's kind of my view of this. To me, the most powerful thing is just that the Buddha never taught this kind of path. Yeah. To me, that's kind of really, really powerful. And so I think if we're going to be disciples of the Buddha, we should follow on. Yeah. Anyway, let's can we stop there, because I think otherwise we're going to be going on for maybe a long time. So let's try to find where we got to. Bodhisattva path. Ding, 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 ding. Okay. So actually, maybe we'll take this one later on. There's a one from outside the center. Here we'll take this. Otherwise, we would take too much time. So let's move on to the next myth or misconception, if you like. And this is quite another one which is fairly common. You may not have heard this before, but actually it is fairly common nonetheless. And that is that the Noble Eightfold Path is only for the Aryas, in other words, the noble ones. And it doesn't really apply to anyone else. And the reason why people have this idea is because of this thing coming up next here. So this is the definition of right view. Right view is the first factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, samma ditti, right view. And this is how it is almost always defined. Knowing about suffering, the origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the practice that leads to the cessation of suffering here. This is how it is defined. And if you look at that definition, then the full knowledge of the Four Noble Truths only happens when you become a noble person, a stream enterer or whatever. That is where you get that knowledge. So then going from that, people say, well, only when you become a stream enterer are you practicing the Noble Eightfold Path. But that is a bit problematic. If you only practice the Noble Eightfold Path when you become a stream enterer, then how do you become a stream enterer? And so this obviously kind of begs the question, what happens then? And then we are kind of in problematic territory here. So I think that is, to my mind, it's over-reading this passage. True, the full knowledge of the Four Noble Truths happens when you become a stream enterer, but you have partial knowledge before that. We all have some idea about suffering. Don't go too close to the fire, otherwise you get burnt. Don't do many immoral and bad things, because you get burnt if you are bad and you treat other people badly. We may have some idea of the limitations of the sensory world around us, and we want to move more towards the spiritual life. So we have already some idea about these things. We have some idea about the path and all of these factors. So I think that is the right way to interpret this. It is not that the path starts when you become a noble one, and before that you haven't got a clue. It is more like a gradual movement. You have some idea, you know these things partially, and because you know them partially, you can practice the path partially, not fully, partially. The difference is really that when you become a noble one, when you become a stream enterer, then you practice the path fully. Because you have seen these things fully, you are always on the path. The path becomes part of you. It is kind of part of your mind. Your mind is always directed in the right direction because you know these things. Prior to that, before you are a stream winner, sometimes you're on the path, sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're partially on the path, sometimes you are not at all. So it is more variable. But the more you know, the more you are on the path. So it's an important point, because I think if we think it's only for the noble ones, it becomes very discouraging, and it becomes very difficult to kind of really try to practice this path.
The only thing that's why when you become a stream winner, that you're not going to lose the path. Until then, you might next lifetime not come to the right right place and right time to follow the path anymore. Whether you have that determination or not, it doesn't really help you if you haven't practiced.
Yeah.
If you're on the stream, you are in the stream.
Then of course, exactly. Then you have something with you. You have something internal with you that you bring to the next life, and because you are independent of the external circumstances, the path will continue in your next life.
Yeah.
But for other people who are dependent on external things, for the path to continue, it is much more problematic. Yeah. This is your.
Oh, okay. Well, you
sutta.
can have the clicker. I think it's. Do I just have one slide? I don't remember. Okay, so this is from the Samyutta Nikaya. I have attained and realized the supreme freedom through proper attention, proper effort. The Buddha is talking to the monks and nuns and lay people. You too should attain and realize the supreme freedom through proper attention and proper effort. This goes with what previously Ajahn Brahmali was saying, that this is not for Aryans. The Buddha said, everybody, you should put the effort, put the right attention and proper effort, and follow him. And instead of, this is not just, he wasn't just talking about the areas that you have to have the right view just to begin the path.
And that proper attention and proper effort, is that equivalent to the Noble Eightfold Path?
I hope so.
Hope so, yeah. Better be, otherwise. Yeah. Okay?
Yep,
yeah.
move on.
Okay, so that was myth number 3 finished. Now we get on to myth number 4. And this is the idea that the factors can be practiced in any sequence. And this is quite a common understanding, I think. You know, sometimes you hear people, let's get on with the mindfulness practice. We sit down, we be mindful of everything. And then that is a practice in its own right. That's all we have to do, really be mindful, and then things will kind of move in the right direction. Yeah, and maybe we can come back to right view and morality later on if we feel like it. And if we don't feel like it, we can maybe just leave it out altogether, perhaps. We'll talk about that later on. So this is idea that there is no real sequence in the path. You can just kind of put the factors together according to pretty much what you feel like. You can start at the end. And what that means is it can be very problematic if you have this kind of wrong idea, because it means that you sit down, you think, yeah, I'm going to get samadhi, I'm going to get into the jhanas, yeah, straight away. Why? Because that is my birthright to get into the jhanas. And that is problematic, yeah. I've seen this happen quite a few times. We have people come to our monastery. I have heard about Ajahn Brahm, he's a jhana teacher. I've come here to practice the jhanas. Yeah, this is kind of this actually happens, and I'm not joking. I know people have specifically said this to me. I've come to this monastery, and I'm going to get the jhanas within 4 years.
Or else.
Or else.
And then they leave.
Or I'm going to get upset with Ajahn Brahm or whatever. But that is the wrong way of thinking about it, yeah, because you don't know how long it is going to take to cultivate these things. You do have to practice these things in the right sequence. If your meditation is not going very well, then it's a very big advantage to understand why your meditation isn't going well. In my experience, when people's meditation isn't going very well, they say, oh, maybe it's because I am watching the meditation object in the wrong way. It's just the breath, right? How many ways can you watch the breath? It's a very simple thing, the breath. It's not a very complicated thing. Yeah, the breath is there, it goes in and out, and you watch that. That's really all there's to it. But these are the kind of things people saying, oh yeah, I'm not really letting go properly. But the answer very often is, it's not about how you do the meditation or about you letting go or watching the breath in the wrong way or whatever. There's a little bit to that, because of course you can do it wrong. But the main reason why people don't make progress in the meditation is because they haven't understood that there is a sequence in these things. Meditation doesn't work, you have to go back to the earlier factors. How good is my morality? Yeah, remember, morality includes your mental morality. How much kindness do I have in my life? How do I think about other people? Do I generally have compassion and understanding and metta towards others? Am I generally a peaceful person? What is my intention? What is my view like? The view is what underlines all of these things. So it matters enormously. So for that reason, it's very important that you remember this, that we talked about on the first day, or last Saturday. The idea that things come in sequence. And then you can start to understand how you can improve your meditation practice, because you understand that there is a sequence to these things. I did mention last time that there is also feedback from the later factors, but this is the main sequence. This is the main force forward. Without the earlier factors, the later ones will not be very strong. That is how you find out. So right view is a very important one. Strengthen right view, and all of these things kind of fall into place. What is the purpose of the Noble Eightfold Path course? Well, a very large part of it is to have more right view, so that this whole thing falls into place. All of this really comes down to practical matters. We want to be practical about this course. So this is very useful, to kind of remind you of what is going on. Look back into this thing, and then you get some idea of where you are missing out and where you are not missing out. And then you will get things in the right sequence, hopefully. So I'm not going to go through those again, because we looked at those before.
Right. So the Noble Eightfold Path starts with the right view, which is needed to understand why this path should be followed. So why do you even practice? Why do you even want to be a Buddhist? What are we doing here? So you have to get your view straightened. And is that easy? Well, it is if you just come to the classes. If you basically, one of the key, which I mentioned last time, when I like the idea that we have teachers, we have the Kalyana Mittas in this path. And in Buddhism, you don't really have to study many things. Inspiration doesn't have to lead to desperation. If you're inspired, and we'll find these things come later, then everything will follow from that. The way you get the inspiration is from your teachers. So just the path starts from somewhere, and it's a nice feedback loop. Next one. Okay, so the right view is the forerunner and guide for the rest of the path. So that is the beginning, but it also guides you every way into the path. So Ajahn Brahmali was just showing all the factors. So now your mindfulness is not correct. Your meditation is not working. Why? Well, your view now is getting straightened because of Ajahn Brahmali, Ajahn Brahm, the Buddha's teachings. Then it feeds you back into the loop, into the beginning, maybe into the right effort, whatever you're missing. That feeds back into the meditation, and hopefully that leads into your right jhanas, right stillness. So there is a beautiful, but you have to have the guide in the path. So it's not just the beginning, but it also guides you everywhere into the path. Yep. Okay. I don't know what else to say. What is it now?
It's good timing. It's actually good timing. Yeah. So we have a few minutes left, if we want, before we break for lunch. Is there any more questions or anything anyone would like to comment on? We can take the last few minutes to discuss any outstanding issues, if you like.
Should I read this question coming outside?
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do the outside questions. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dear Ajahn, if we like to go to movies and have a beer on the weekend, can we still be headed in the right general direction with the Noble Eightfold Path? Go have a beer and go to movies? Are we still heading into Noble Eightfold Path? No, it's just Ajahn. Doesn't say Mudito.
You're Ajahn as well then?
No, in a few months.
Yeah.
Okay, why not? How long do you have to have from your previous beer before you can go and meditate?
Was that a question or?
No, I'm just saying. Sometimes maybe in the next morning you feel nice and peaceful because you cannot do anything. You have a hangover and you just sit down. And the thing is, go to the movies. Let's start with that one. I mean, all of us, even time of the Buddha, there was even the monks seemed to be, and the nuns seemed to be going into the country fairs and all that. And it wasn't always condemned. I mean, you know, monks and nuns, you shouldn't be doing that, but the lay people definitely did it, and these things always have existed. These, when I've noticed for myself that when you kept practicing more and more, you seem to lose interest on them naturally. So it's not like you have to, the restrainment, the sense restrainment, it's a integral part of this path. But I think quite often it might be too restrictive for some people. Sometimes you just need to go to movies and just forget about it. There's that idea of people who have, you limit yourself too much, and then you're not happy. If you're not happy, it's difficult to let go. It just becomes this path of you become too ascetic too fast. You slowly letting go. Seem if maybe you're not interested in certain things anymore. Maybe you go to movies, but you don't go to the nightclub. Maybe you do go to the nightclub, but you don't go to the, I don't know what's next word.
Casino?
I've probably been there. But anyways, so gradually, and sometimes you fall off, sometimes you're like, okay, you have alcohol and all that. Alcohol in itself, this is the second part of this question. Alcohol in itself, it's maybe not so bad, but it leads you into a certain direction. It's one of those things which is difficult to let go. It's such an integral part of our society these days, the alcohol, that you think it's okay, and that's why I was saying earlier, but that in certain Buddhist places of practice, they want to leave these things out, you want to leave the alcohol precepts out, that okay, it's fine to drink alcohol. Well, the Buddha put down these precepts, these training precepts for us to follow, that you have your purity of mind will sort of follow from that. If we start leaving things out, where do we end up? Can you have Ajahn Brahm has these little things like, okay, you can have a little bit of beer. Well, I have 2 beers a week, and does it matter? Is it okay to have a little bit of cheating your wife or your husband? Is it okay to cheat your wife a little bit? Is it okay to kill a little bit? Where do you set the limit? Where is your purity of your mind? Where is your level at the moment? You may be lying a little bit. You may be drinking a little bit, but you are aiming towards mind, which is, you don't have to worry. When you let the mind go, you don't think about it. It's just so you don't have to, you don't contemplate those things. Whatever the object in the mind, what it's in front of you, that's your mindful, that's your object of meditation. And if your object is remorse, it's really difficult to let go. We're trying to let those things go before they don't follow you into the meditation.
Is it another question?
There's another one here.
Okay, I'll just quickly also just comment just very briefly on that one. And I think one of the important things on the path is to understand that it is gradual, and you have and not to do things too fast. That basically saying what you said, but to try to kind of allow these things almost to evolve naturally. So it feels right not to do too much entertainment. It feels right not to drink beer or alcohol. For me, the idea of, I used to drink when I was a student, 30 years ago, or whatever it is, a long time ago now, 35 or whatever. And, the idea of being drunk and not kind of feeling that your mind is sort of out of control, to me now seems very unpleasant. The whole idea just seems really, I don't even want to contemplate it. And in the moment you feel that it is unpleasant because your mind is out of control, you don't want to drink anymore. The reason why we drink is all kind of social reasons, or maybe because you need to relax or whatever. But once you start to see it in the right way, you naturally withdraw. The same thing with entertainment. If you start to see how you lose your mindfulness when you go to see a movie or whatever, and the Buddha specifically says this, if you go to see shows, the biggest problem with that is that you lose your sense restraint. You get drawn into the action and you kind of lose your sense of place and time because you're so drawn into the movie that you lose your ability to really be in charge of your mind. And when the hero cries, you cry. And when you know what it's like, you go to the movies. And that is the problem. But don't be too strict on yourself. Don't kind of make life a joyless affair. Do it gradually. It's not as if you've done anything terrible by watching a movie or anything. But feel, gradually let it move in the right direction. Instead of watching television 8 hours a day, watch it 7 hours a day. Improvement. So that is kind of thing. You do things gradually. You feel things out in the right way, and then it becomes natural. It becomes easy. You know that what you're doing is right.
And quite often we see people who come back to the path and they said, yes, I was doing that, and they were meditating just like, let's say 2 hours a day, and if they miss 2 hours today, 1.5, then they have to do 2.5 tomorrow. And then it becomes so restrictive that they feel obliged to do certain things, and it's so restrictive, and you give up.
So much willpower.
So much willpower you give up.
Things,
it's not inspiration. It's not happiness anymore. Okay. I just read quickly, but I think this might not take so long. Dear Ajahn, I'm Eddie from Indonesia. Oh, Eddie's in Indonesia today?
No, he's
no, a different Eddie maybe. What is Buddha's view about the spirit world? There are also supernatural power issues. Most importantly, what is the Buddha's view about God? Okay. Well, what does the Buddha say about spirit world, and what is the Buddha's view about God? This is for Ajahn, definitely. It is an interesting thing that quite often I've been asked about. I deal with builders quite often, and the question arises, do you believe in God? And what do we say about the spirit world? And it's difficult sometimes. It's like, do you believe in God? And you just say no. It's just sort of end of the conversation. And I've had those questions sometimes coming up. And but we do have them. We have not just one God. We have gods, many gods, perhaps. But that sort of ties in together with the spirit world.
Do you pray to those gods, Venerable?
Do we pray for them? I don't know. No, not really. At least not me. Yeah.
Not you.
But the spirit world and the gods, but it's sort of, for us, it goes hand in hand. I don't know what to say about it, really. Yeah.
Well, the spiritual world is certainly an integral part of the Buddhist teachings, and if you read the sutras, you read the word of the Buddha, the idea of various kinds of spirits is fundamental to the Buddhist outlook. The idea that you can be reborn into all kinds of situations. And that includes, of course, the spirit world. And there's many spirit world is very broad, and it can be all kinds of spirits, happy spirits, miserable spirits, super duper happy spirits, and all of these kind of things. And that's very much part of the Buddhist practice. So yes, certainly this is part of Buddhism. In fact, Buddhism would not be the same without it, because it would reduce kind of the whole idea of rebirth and being reborn in different realms or whatever. It would reduce that down to almost something which becomes far too limited to make sense out of this, out of the potential for human happiness and suffering here. So if you're going to have a proper idea of karma and how good karma leads to real happiness, you almost need the idea of a spirit world to be able to make that possible. You can be reborn in a miserable state or a happy state. With a human body, there's a limit to how much happy you can be, because this body is a bit of a pain in the it's pain anyway. So that is very much so. So what about God then? So this here really comes back to the definition of God. And usually in most religions, the idea of God, what they mean is a creator God, a God that creates the universe and creates humanity and creates individuals. And that sort of God is not part of the Buddhist teachings. In fact, the Buddha specifically said that such a God does not exist. There is no such a God. There is no, because that kind of God would be a permanent entity, because always be there, standing behind existence and making things exist. So it kind of requires a permanent entity in the universe. And the Buddha says there is no such thing. There is no permanent entity. Everything is impermanent, anicca, turning around. So that doesn't exist. But because there is a spirit world, and some of these spirits can be, very glorious and beautiful and bright and powerful compared to human beings, they have some of the qualities you would expect a god to have. Yeah? And for that reason, because they have some of those qualities, you can call them little gods. Yeah? Godlets? Godlets? Is that a word?
Godlet.
Yeah?
Oh my God, it's Ajahn Brahm.
I was supposed to come for lunch? Time, okay. Okay, so time out. Okay, very good. Thank you, Ajahn, for reminding us. Gee, okay, good. We just finished. That's perfect timing.
Yep, good timing, yep.
So please have a nice lunch, everyone. And we'll see you back again at 12:15. Talking about God as a Brahma, right? Okay.
Can we leave this stuff here? Yeah, why not? Okay. Or maybe take it. It's like the